Thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is information about me. Some of you know that already, 38-year career in local government. I retired from the city of Rock Island after 25 years as city manager in September of 2011. So it's been like 5 years since I retired, and now I volunteer for the City Managers Association, the Illinois City Management Association, and the International City Management Association. Pay my expenses to go to conferences. I'm available for members if they've got problems or issues, concerns. I get contacts from other city managers, administrators, and then also cities like this who are asking questions about professional local government. This is self-explanatory. I'm going over this information tonight, the forms of municipal government in Illinois, specifically in the council manager form of government, and then questions and answers. This part is pretty clear. There's a little difference in municipalities in terms of the local government services that a city provides. Some cities, for example, have parks, park districts rather than parks departments run by the municipality. Might have a sanitary district. There's quite a variety in Illinois local government in that respect. These are some of those services that are generally provided by local government. One of the things I have found in my career in the Midwest, working in Rockford and working in Rock Island, that things like neighborhood development, housing, renovation, the condition of the economy, jobs, private investment, economic development, partnerships with colleges and not-for-profits and schools and all that kind of stuff is also a big thing on the agenda. So a lot of times we think about local government in this respect, which are those basic services, but a lot of times community leadership is expected from your local government to move the needle, so to speak, on some of those broader issues like what's happening with housing or what's happening with jobs in our area. So you end up spending a lot of time in local government on those issues as well. I think to some extent, in my last position when I first went into Rock Island, they did a strategic plan every year. We continued that. It was a very important process where the mayor and the council would get together. They establish a vision statement, they do strategic planning, determine what goals, and then we get down to determining what are the most important projects and priorities. They would actually vote on those, come up with a consensus on what the things were that we should be working on. So we continued that, but they were doing that before I went to Rock Island, and but we certainly continued it, and I always said it was one of the most important things I thought that we did, not only for them and the community to see what the priorities were, but from a maybe a personal standpoint, it gave me clear direction about their expectations. You weren't being tugged in a lot of different directions. You pretty much knew what the priorities of the group were once you came out of that session. So it was a very valuable process. The mayor council, that's pretty familiar to people. Under this form, the mayor may appoint a city administrator. Sometimes under a mayor council, if there is an administrator, that city administrator is appointed by the mayor and council. Sometimes it's by the mayor. The city council clearly has legislative responsibility. I note that in the country, the mayor council form of government is the most common in small towns under 5,000 and larger cities over 250,000. That's where you see mostly mayor council forms of government. I think a lot of it is tradition. Typically, there are more political environments in some of the large cities, and they're comfortable having that mayor be that visible political leader. Now, there are some big cities like Phoenix and San Antonio and okay, yeah, that have council manager form of government, but there's still more of the large cities with mayor council. You know, a lot of times they would hire people under those forms of government that have skills. Unfortunately, sometimes they have political skills and maybe not necessarily management skills, but sometimes they have both, and they can really help that mayor be successful in those large cities. They need a lot of professional staff in a large community to make things work. Commission form of government, I'll touch on that briefly. There's a few of those in Illinois yet. Many have changed to either council manager or mayor council forms. This is unusual really in today's thinking because the legislators have executive and legislative responsibility. They have a specific area of the municipal operation that they have charge of. And so you have a commissioner of public works, a commissioner of finance, and some would say that some of the problems in Dixon that occurred, you could lay at the groundwork of the form of government, the commission form of government, because you have an elected person with no experience or background in finance that has overseen someone for a long period of time, and you know, and they don't always work together either under that form of government. In Illinois, a lot of those have hired administrators actually, but there's still some fundamental problems with it because that commissioner has authority, and they may or may not choose to delegate it to the administrator. So, but this is, when you look right at it, these are some of the things that every community needs. Political leadership, you still need good elected officials. Those are the ones that are determining the direction, that vision. It's their decision as to where the community goes. So you need that leadership. Policy development. City manager can help with policy development, provide options for consideration to the elected officials, and then the council and mayor decide what direction to take. The focus on execution and results. You know, someone's got to take charge and try to make it happen. Transparent and ethical government, that's so important. Some people talk about running government like a business, but really it's a different animal in local government where the level of transparency and a high standard of ethics are very, very important. And then representation and engagement of all segments of the community. People have to feel like they have a voice and are not left out. So a lot of things you do could be done quicker or more efficient, but sometimes you need to go out in the community and ask people what they really think and get their feedback and then move forward. I was reading something recently, an article by Bob O'Neill, who is just a retiring executive director of the International City County Management Association, and he writes articles for Governing Magazine. And so one of those articles said that if you want a community that is innovative, that really takes risks, that moves forward on things that could be controversial but are important and innovative, three things are needed. One is trust. You need the trust of the people. You need to build that trust between local government and citizens. The second is political leadership. And the third is strong executive leadership and competence to execute. And so I thought that kind of summed it up pretty well, because in my experience, so people say, well, how come we can't just do this? Well, is the political leadership strong? You know, are the mayors and everybody willing to move ahead? Do you have competent staff everywhere to help make that forward? And in some governments, there's not that level of trust to be able to go out there and try things that are really innovative, because they just don't have the confidence of the people. So the council manager form of government is something that we're certainly studying here. The mayor elected by council or at large, policy leadership, One of the things about this is that I'd like to emphasize is it's really important not to understate the role of the mayor in the council manager form of government. I think sometimes people have a tendency to do that. And that is a big mistake, because it is still continues to be a very, very important role. One, setting the vision for the community with working with the council, the ability to work with the council, policy leadership, representing the city in local, regional, state, or national kinds of activities. Sometimes large economic development projects, staff does the work, but sometimes they want to see the mayor, and they want to have confidence that the mayor can bring that council together for a vote to approve that development agreement. The mayor plays a really important role. And if you spend any time in Springfield, like I had to do in my former life, I say some of the most impressive mayors that I would meet are from council manager forms of government. The thing that they don't do is have that day-to-day executive responsibility to deal with the issues and the problems that come in and making it happen. But in terms of leadership and policy development, they typically, you still need that strength. Yes, in terms of leadership with, let's say, a regional group that is promoting development, business development, attraction, or working with existing businesses. So again, it needs to be determined if it's a priority. That's the number one job of the mayor, and support that effort. When the budget comes around, put some money behind that effort. Sit on maybe those regional groups, whether it be like with the community college or the county or other efforts. In terms of the day-to-day contact with the businesses, or putting together strategies for how to make this a success, that's typically a staff function. That's where the city manager, and if the town is large enough, they might have a community development director or an economic development director on staff that would do that. A lot of the smaller communities in Illinois that I've been working with, a lot of times the city manager is doing that themselves. But the mayor still plays a very important role in promoting, encouraging, emphasizing the importance of it, working with the other regional organizations that you need to work with if you're going to be successful in attracting jobs or business to your community, working with the chamber, et cetera. Typically the city manager is there also working with some of those groups, but you really need that leadership from the elected official, the chief elected official, to kind of give authority to make sure that this is a priority. Sometimes these duties overlap a bit. I mean, there's a good city manager will encourage the mayor and the council to look 3-5 years down the road. As I get a little further along here on some of this information, sometimes the city manager, in my case, in many cases, really has a longer term outlook because the mayors and elected officials aren't there that long. Sometimes they are the continuity in terms of looking at long-term projects and making sure they move forward. But I don't think you're off base on that. It is a responsibility of the manager to look for that short-term, day-to-day, get it done. But a lot of times the goals really require the manager to lay the groundwork to move projects forward that may take 5 years or 10 years, building a bridge across the Mississippi River, or so these 25, 30 years. I mean, a lot of these things that you do take a lot of time too. So. city manager is accountable. The mayor would listen to constituents along with members of the city council to determine what needs to be done, what policies, what programs, what direction, what vision. That is their job. And I say the manager can lay out options, make suggestions, share what they're hearing, what the needs are from their perspective, but it's the decision of the elected officials as to what direction they go and what is actually accomplished. You could. Yeah, you could. Unless there's a tie, no vote. Most of the time that's the way it's considered. There are probably exceptions to that, but the vast majority it is a part-time position in a community this size. Informally, the city manager, as they're preparing the budget, working with departments, will have conversations with the chief elected official, if they're smart, and will say, hey, things aren't adding up too well here. We're going to have the shortfall. I'm going to be suggesting this. It depends on that relationship. And a lot of times the mayor will say, that's never going to fly politically. Could you come back with some other ideas? And so you have those kinds of conversations. So the mayor has a lot of influence, though the final analysis they don't have the vote. But as the chief primary elected official, they have a tremendous amount of influence on the city manager as well as the members of the city council. They're elected by all the people, and that means quite a bit in democracy. Under this form of government, the city manager appoints the police chief and fire chief. So the city manager should be highly trained, nonpartisan, experienced, execute programs, policies, keeps current on laws, best practices, works within the organization to develop and maintain excellence. One thing about a council manager form of government is typically you can recruit and retain professional department heads a little bit easier because the continuity that provides for them, that buffer between the politics, helps to recruit and retain professional staff. And so that is an advantage that I noted when I went from a mayor council form as an administrator to a city manager. Subject to termination by a majority vote of the city council. Well, there's provisions where they can be, it depends on the contract, I should say, and all those contracts can be different.
Right.
Typically, they will have a severance provision where if you terminate them for any reason, you would have to provide the severance. If you terminate them for cause, then you could terminate them at any point and maybe not even provide the severance. So now, how you define cause is an important issue for a city manager. These are the kinds of calls I get from administrators and managers who are maybe having some tension with their councils, and that's an important issue. It really depends on the community and the agreement. Most cases, it is not subject to a hearing or anything like that if it's not in your contract. I always said my tenure was dependent on 4 votes on a Monday night. I mean, any time they could. Now they'd have to give me my severance, and typically the typical severance these days is 6 months, and mine was a little less than that, but fortunately I didn't need it. But it gives that person time to try to find another job, but there could be other provisions of those employment agreements in order to provide protection on both sides. It's negotiated between the selected candidate and the elected officials. The transitions, first of all, there have not been that many cases and examples. There's been transitions from commission form, there's been transitions from mayor-council to council-manager forms. I almost would suggest that every community's rather unique. Yeah, and they may have a special way to operate, and they would have some unique circumstances that might change with that transition to the council manager form. And I'm not sure you could really make any specific suggestions about a change. I would advise a new city manager in a city to try to establish the position. You have an opportunity to define this new position with the mayor and council, and then kind of take it from there, determine in what way does the community have needs, and move forward. I mean, some cities might have things like a capital improvement plan, and it is in place. They may have good professional staff. In other cases, they may have some weak areas, and so trying to boost those weak areas. Or maybe they've not done any strategic planning, so suggesting something like that could be an initiative that could be offered by a new city manager. But it kind of depends on the community and what their situation is as to what they might want to do. These are some of the important features of the council manager local government. One of the most important is separating the legislative from the executive, whereas under the mayor-council, the mayor shares executive and legislative authority. It centralizes that executive authority with the city manager, increases professionalism and expertise. It's a more ethical and nonpartisan approach. I'm not saying that all mayor-council forms of government aren't ethical or nonpartisan, but this is part of the DNA of the council-manager form of government, is high standard of ethics and a nonpartisan approach to execution of local services. And then I think an important distinction is the last one, where with this form of government, the city council and the mayor share oversight of operations. Under a mayor-council form, the mayor has the oversight of the operations. Under this, the mayor and council oversee the city manager, and in my opinion, it gives the city council members a little more authority in that respect. They're not just, they're legislators primarily, but also they hire the person who's in charge of making sure that this works. I agree. I think it does. Under any form of government, I think the quality of your elected officials is very, very, very important. I think a city manager, again, you can offer sessions on governance. I used to do that with like new elected officials, our form of government and how does this work and our roles and who does what, and you go through orientation and try to do that. But the quality of your elected officials is very, very important. Well, the Municipal League has training for new elected officials, and I used to always encourage my new council members to attend, but I didn't leave it at that either, because that's kind of a general overview. A lot of times it's legal stuff, which is important. It's freedom of information. It's meetings, public meetings, in terms of being lawful in your conversations with others and violation of Open Meetings Acts or things like that, which are very important. But you want to talk to them about your environment and your culture and the values that you've had in your community, to kind of give them a good head start about fitting in with the rest of the elected officials. So most of the city managers I know do an orientation for newly elected officials to help them get a good start. Some of them do it before they are elected. Some of them, I did not do that. Some of them do that when people are running for office. We'll give them that opportunity for an orientation. And that's the same thing for mayor candidates. So it's not a bad practice to, sometimes citizens don't have the full picture of everything that's going on until they're there. And then it can be a little overwhelming sometimes about the challenges. So better to clue them in early, answer as many questions as you can. Again, nonpartisan. You're not backing any candidate. You're not an R or a D or anything. It's just want you to know information is a good thing, and we're transparent and want to provide it. This model, the council manager form is really not that unique or unusual in our form of understanding of how organizations function. And this is just one example with the corporate model, with the citizens as shareholders and the city manager, CEO, the mayor's chairman of the board, and the manager is accountable to the city council and to the citizens, in that case are the shareholders. So it's pretty common in terms of school boards. I think are very similar. Community college boards, they may have a chairman of the community college board, a president of the community college board, but that president isn't the CEO, doesn't operate, doesn't make decisions on hiring the professors or the heads of the departments. That's usually, they hire a leader, someone to do that work for them, a professional with experience. A lot of times it's a lot of training and education in order to accomplish that. The president of the school board or the community college board would be like the mayor. As a chief elected official, elected at large, has important responsibilities, the policy leadership, the community leadership, and does have oversight over the city manager. And in practice, it's always a very, very important position. That's the way it is. These are challenging jobs because sometimes there is conflict between factions of a city council or maybe between members of the city council and the mayor. They are all your bosses. So sometimes you have a role in trying to get people to work together, trying to understand what their issues are, how can we address them. Sometimes it's personality conflicts, and you do your best with that. Now, often the mayor helps if you've got conflicts within the council, can help with that. And that's really nice for a city manager if the mayor can really help that. And you don't have to because they're your bosses. But bottom line is, to make the government work effectively, you need to get beyond those personalities and those differences and look at what's best for the community. And that's what a good city manager tries to do. But yes, that relationship with the mayor is very, very important, and you want to maintain that. Now, that's not to say that sometimes the city manager, council might be tugging the city manager one way, and it might be opposed to the mayor. So sometimes there are situations where a recommendation may be made that the mayor is not in favor of. I mean, it happens, and the mayor understands that, hey, that's the way it works sometimes, but you try to stay on the same page and understand your roles and move the community forward in partnership. This is an important part of change to a council manager form of government. The Code of Ethics, I included there just a few of the tenets of the Code of Ethics. There are 12 major tenets. And I'll send a copy of that along with the slide presentation to Pat. She can distribute that, and you can see that. point out a couple of those. Elected representatives get the credit. That's part of the code of ethics. I mean, a good city manager should not be out front that much. I mean, they're available, they're accessible, but they should not be out cutting ribbons and taking credit for city initiatives. The elected officials are the ones that take credit for the successes. And the other thing, the refrain from all political activities, personnel decisions based on merit. One of the things that sometimes needs to be clarified is this doesn't mean that you have a standard of what's legal. This is a higher standard. Then there was just an article that I saw. This is our association sanctioned and actually kicked out a city manager in Florida recently. And I'll give you a little information. It's Madeira Beach. And he was publicly censured and permanently expelled from membership in the International City County Management Association. And I thought this was a good case because he had received a review by his legal counsel that it was okay, and he had informed the city council, and they were okay with it. But he was sanctioned and expelled by ICMA because it's a higher standard. I'll tell you, what he did is he had a personal relationship with his chief assistant, and the ICMA said that exposed the organization to liability, created the potential for conflicts of interest, in fact and or appearance stemming from professional decisions made with regard to the employee, constrain the professional relationships between the city manager and between employees, and also that he personally gained from the relationship, according to the findings, since he and the employee reside together, they share a bank account, so he was giving this person raises and therefore benefiting from it. And he did seek legal advice before entering into the relationship and disclosed it to all members of the commission, but he failed to ask the ICMA whether this is a violation of the Code of Ethics. Well, someone else, which usually happens in our business, if they sense that some city manager has done something, they will ask ICMA to investigate it. And it says here that the city attorney, it said, it is not a violation of the law for him to have a relationship with her at City Hall. There's absolutely nothing legally wrong with the relationship that they have. So it is a higher standard, and the ethical standards are higher than what's legal. A lot of times people talk about, well, it's legal, but this Code of Ethics really demands, requires that members of the association do their work to a higher standard of ethics. So I thought that was timely. That was an article from Monday. Try to summarize the value in these statements. The council manager form of government recognizes the critical role of elected leaders to map the vision for the community and establish policies that govern it, and then establishes the city manager position to oversee the operations, a professional devoted to the equitable, efficient, and ethical delivery of services to residents. So in that way it separates the legislative and the policy development from the administration. And I'm going to get into a little bit later the distinctions between a city administrator and a city manager too, because under this form of government you can hold that manager responsible. You're giving them the authority, so you can hold them accountable. They do appoint the police chief and the fire chief. So if there are issues, problems, challenges, you can hold a city manager accountable for that. I always felt it was not fair to hold me responsible for things I didn't have control over. And sometimes we have no problem with that, but I always had a problem with that. You know, hold me accountable, fine, but give me the ability to manage what I'm being held accountable for. And that's what this form of government does, clearly, under the state law and with a referendum. The council decides what we're going to do, and the city manager is how we're going to do it. So this was taken from some of the ICMA literature about, well, how does it work? 2/3 of Moody's AAA bond-rated communities are run by professional local government managers. This IBM Global Business Services study, I actually have a copy of that if anyone's interested. It said that council manager cities that they've studied are nearly 10% more efficient than those that are mayor-council form. Well, the study is called Smarter, Faster, Cheaper. It was done in February 2011. It's not an easy thing to do, and I'm not going to sit here and verify their technique or their model for research and study, but ICMA was quick to grab it when they finally, someone did that kind of research. It's a pretty lengthy study, but it's Smarter, Faster, Cheaper, and it's IBM Global Business Services Study, and it was done in February of 2011. You might want to take a look at it. If you look at it and you feel they use good research techniques and had a defensible system to study that, maybe it could be of use for you. Unfortunately, it kind of comes down to me a lot of anecdotes, and how would they come up with that? Well, sometimes it could be on the revenue side where you're doing a better job of collecting revenues. Sometimes it's on the expense side where maybe you're working with another government unit to share services or doing joint purchasing project that hasn't been done, that you see some low-hanging fruit where there's an opportunity to do things cheaper. It's typically a combination of things that result in the ability to be more effective in the services that are provided and more efficient in how they're provided. Unless you dove into the actual operation, you can't really say where those areas are. I certainly wouldn't say where those areas are. I could come up with some examples of things that I did, but Freeport might be doing those already. It's not to say that they're not.
2/3 of Moody's AAA bond-rated communities are run by professional. What percentage of communities are rated AAA by Moody, which are not run by professional local? Is that number 28% or is it 83? Nearly 2/3 are rated AAA. Is that good in comparison to the reverse, or is it bad?
Yeah, I agree.
It doesn't tell me that whether the mayor-council form has a significantly lower percentage of AAA bond-rated communities.
Well, that's the way I would interpret it.
Or it's, well, yes, of course, but I'm the voter, so
right.
So is that significantly higher, significantly lower, or pretty much the same? Is that a statistically significant difference? Same thing with the bottom one. 73% of communities recognized between these with the All-American City Award are council manager. Again, what is the percentage of mayor-council cities that were recognized in those cities as All-American, or in those years as All-American City Awards?
Well, I would say it's probably 27%.
27%.
That's what this is saying. That the other 27%.
The first one, but the second one or the third one down is more clear.
And then
That is the average.
What percent of the communities, without respect to whether they won the All-American City, what percent of the communities are council manager, and that could skew it. So.
Well, the other point on that, what I don't know what Freeport's current bond rating is. Totally.
It dropped. Didn't it drop? Yeah. I thought, didn't it drop? Yeah.
Yeah, the issue with Freeport is not the bond rating, it's the tax cap, or the assist evaluations, they're running into a situation where they're going to find it hard to qualify, regardless of.
And there are a lot of issues that go into bond ratings. I was in the middle of a lot of that over the years. And one issue certainly is the strength of your local economy. Your assessed value and what it's been doing in terms, is it flat, is it growing, is it declining, and your other revenues. But another part of it, however, is financial planning. Do you have a financial plan? Do you have a capital improvement plan? Do you have, the strength of your plans? And then your management is a factor. It could be even the state of Illinois right now. Being the state of Illinois hurts your. You may be rated AA, but you're not going to get as good an interest rate in Illinois when you sell bonds as you will in Iowa or Wisconsin when you sell bonds. There's a penalty, an Illinois penalty on the interest rate because you're in Illinois. So there are a bunch of factors. So do with that what you wish. Those are some things that I came up with because that is a frequently asked question. It's a very difficult one to answer because communities vary so much from one place to another. This is, I've been asked this question and spent a little time going through it and thought I'd share this. City manager, what are the distinctions? And they're basically, city manager, one, it's authorized by state law, established by referendum, and it has specified executive duties and authority under the state law. It can only be eliminated by the referendum. So it's kind of those things. The city administrator is established by ordinance of the city council. The duties can vary greatly from city to city, and it can be modified or eliminated at any time by the city council. So people, ask, and it's a fair question, what is the difference? Well, the difference is really on the administrator side. The city manager form of government is in the state law. If it's passed by referendum, it's pretty clear what the duties of the city manager are. City administrator can be all over the board. It can be appointed by the mayor or the mayor and city council. It can have appointment authority of department heads and have responsibility to prepare the budget, or the mayor might continue to appoint department heads, and the mayor might present the budget under a city administrator. So sometimes it's kind of a coordinating function, staff position for the mayor. Sometimes it is very much like a city manager position. Over the years, an example would be the city of Moline. When I went there many years ago, I'd say 30 years ago, it was a pretty weak position. And they had partisan elections. The administrator didn't make appointments of most of the department heads. The mayor did that. But over time, they modified it, often with referendums to go to nonpartisan elections, give the administrator authority to make appointments. They really kind of mirrored what a council manager government is. So you can do it, and then they've kept it. They haven't modified it. So you will, when you see city administrator positions, and this is important for people in our business where this is our career, and if you're applying for a city administrator position, you really have to dig deep and find out what is this position really, and you have to make that judgment evaluation, and that's what I advise people who are part of the profession to be careful and check those ordinances that establish the position. So it's not to say it can't work, because there's a lot of great administrators in Illinois, and there's a lot of mayor councils. There's, as I mentioned before, there's commission forms of government that have administrators. But I've worked in both, and I'll tell you, the council manager form of government is by far will attract your best candidates for the position because you've got the clarity. Again, getting back to what I said about you're going to hold me responsible, give me the authority to do what I need to do in order to execute the job and then be evaluated based upon the performance. But give me a position of city administrator, sometimes you're not quite sure whether you've got that authority or not. Not really, no. I mean, I wouldn't, if you establish a position of city manager, I wouldn't look negatively at a person who worked as a city administrator somewhere. They may have the credentials. It just may be that there's other opportunities out there as administrators. They took those jobs, but they might be very good candidates for a city manager. I'd say any community that's recruiting either one should be looking at candidates that have the training, the experience. There's also a credentialing provision in ICMA now where you have to have 40 hours of training and education every year of some sort. And so you can become a credentialed manager that way. So that's another little thing that I would look for if I was recruiting for the position. It shows their dedication to the profession and every aspect of the profession if they've taken that time to stay with the standards. Now, I offered a little bit of information about the transition, and again, I will hesitate to say that I'm an expert on this, and I'm not, because this is where legal advice comes in. But I've thrown this out, and I provided some information that gets into it a little bit more detail. But this is how I could see it unfolding, but it's really ultimately up to the mayor and council as to, if this passes, how they would like to see that transition take place. But it is very important. Your ordinances of the city will need to be modified to reflect the state statutes under the council manager form of government if it passes. And so that work needs to be done. And then there are other ordinances where there will be conflicts, where maybe it is now the city manager's responsibility to do X rather than the mayor's or others. And so those might need to be changed. We talked about the salary issue that would need to be acted on if there is interest in modifying the mayor's salary right after the election. So, and then the recruitment process, this committee that could be appointed could be a group like this that would suggest a recruitment and selection process for the first city manager. And I can provide some help. I wouldn't do the actual recruitment, but I certainly can provide the steps and the process that cities usually go through to do such a recruitment. And this idea, if everyone was on board, that recruitment process could start prior to May. But there's some advantages of that from a time standpoint. The disadvantage of that is the new elected officials are the ones who really will be the boss of that person hired, so they need to make that selection. And if you wait, then they can also have more feedback or input on what the priorities are for that first person. What are the main skills that this city manager should have, those newly elected officials. So some advantages of moving ahead and kind of getting the process going, but there might be a thought that, well, we just want to wait until we seat the new elected officials before we get started with the recruitment, and that's an arguable position too. One thing I wanted to just go over before I kind of open it up for further discussion, and that is an article, and I might ship this off to you also. This was another article by Bob O'Neill, and it's a value proposition for the professional city manager. Don't worry about that. I think that's Northern Illinois University trying to collect money from me, is what that is. They've been trying to get a hold of me for a long time, and I'm always busy, so let them continue. 6 areas of that he identifies are important, that add value. 1, a higher level of ethical standards and personal integrity, and we've kind of touched on that. Efficiency and results that matter. So you're dedicated to the successful stewardship of the public's assets and the idea of achieving measurable results. The third is a long-term community-wide perspective. Touched on that a little bit earlier. He points out that the worldview is framed by policies developed sometimes with 60-second sound bites, term limits, and sometimes the local professional manager may be the only one who can bring a long-term perspective to discussions and strategies. Democratic values, and that we get back to that, trying to balance efficiency, running it like a business with important democratic values of inclusiveness and transparency. Developing and sustaining competency within the organization, organizational excellence, building and sustaining organizational capacity. And then the last of the 6 is equity. Equity. Great organizations are about inclusiveness. They consider those who may not have a strong voice to make sure they're involved. And that's part of the values and the culture of city managers. And he suggests that's what the professionals can bring to a community. In any situation with new elected officials, there needs to be a session on governance and an orientation. And I think that would be very important, even more important certainly with a change in the form of government, so that people understand roles. You know, if you have a common understanding of who does what, it can avoid some conflict. And that is really important for success. So I don't know how that might be structured, but it's certainly, you know, if I could help out if that situation occurred, or you could hire someone who does that kind of training to help with that process with newly elected officials and the new form of government, that I think would be of value. Well, in terms of hiring top-level people, the city manager clearly has that authority to hire and fire. Now, having said that, most of the time for those high-profile type positions, let's say it's a police chief, you know, I always opted for a pretty inclusive process. You know, I'd have the bargaining unit participate and interview the finalists. I had reception for the finalists with the city council members. I had my fire and police commission interview the finalists, and department heads. All the other department heads interview the finalists for a position like that. Sometimes, you know, there were times when that was such a highly important position, even put on the internet. You know, if we're hiring, what are the characteristics you think are most important for the next police chief? And so you get that input. And I would emphasize to those groups, you know, don't tell me who I should hire. Tell me the strengths and weaknesses of these candidates from your perspective. And then, because it is my decision, and I'm going to have to live with it, but I got a lot of good feedback, and they really appreciated the opportunity to have that input. You know, the employees had a chance to weigh in on their future boss. You know, the department heads felt good. They were always involved with the tours of these finalists of the community. Even if they were internal candidates, they had a chance to visit and tour the communities. So, you know, again, being transparent, inclusive, and open leads a lot of city managers, even though they have that authority to open up and get input from not only the members of the city council, but from their community and other stakeholders. So that's a kind of approach that I recommend to managers and administrators, and those are the ones that do last a little bit longer than someone who would just come in and just do something without getting sufficient input. Right now, I think it's like 5 to 7 years. It's pretty long. It actually used to be shorter than that, but I think some of the influence of that is spouses working, and it's harder to move around these days. You know, just pick up the family and go, and then have your spouse get a job wherever they're going. And so it's kind of rooted, I think, some of the people in the business a little bit longer in their communities. And, I I mentioned inviting a couple of city managers in this region to some of these meetings, and they've been around a long time. And as I talked to them, it was sort of the same thing for me. You're challenged in this job. There's no doubt about it. There's lots of challenges. But if you've got a good team of staff and you've got a good group of elected officials who are, want to do good work for their community and they work in partnership with you, why would you go anyplace else and go into a place that doesn't have those ingredients? So you find Mike Van Milligan in Dubuque for 23 years, and I talked to him couple weeks ago, and he said, hey, things are going good. He says he wants to be there longer than I was in Rock Island. And I said, well, you got 2 more years. And I was there 25. But so it does happen. And I think it's happening a little bit more. Well, my first experience was really in a community development department, and I was ended up being director of the community development department in Rockford. So I got involved in a lot of economic development work and neighborhood redevelopment work and that sort of thing. And then the position opened up. It was the first administrator in Rockford that they established, and then I was an internal person, and they knew me, so they hired me. And then I got my experience that way. But people come at it from a lot of different directions. So you can get experience in some of the departments, let's say as a department head. Some of that relates to what's really important for a community. It helped me in that I had experience in the economic development area, because that's what the community in Rock Island was really looking for. Some people might have experience in another department that wouldn't be as appealing to them. Let's say it was public works or police or something. So not as much. I think what you want to look at is, before the experience, you want to look at someone who's made this a career, who's gone on and got a master's degree in public administration, shown their interest in living by and being part of a profession with the code of ethics and that kind of thing. And for a city this size, I would hope that you would be able to attract people who had experience as a city administrator or city manager in a smaller community, that would see this as a challenge and a step up for them. And you'd look for somebody who didn't move. It's just like any other job. You don't want to look for someone who's moved around every year or 2 years. You want somebody who's had a good experience where they've been. And those people are out there, but so it isn't easy for the people to get started, but there are assistant positions out there as well. Not so much downstate, but in the Chicago metropolitan area, there's a lot of assistant city managers, assistant to city managers, that gives them an opportunity to get experience without being the city manager. And so that's also how some of the downstate communities, smaller downstate communities I'm working with, that's where I've seen some people get hired recently. They worked in the Chicago suburbs as an assistant, and they might be kind of from that area, and now they move back, and now they're an administrator in a small town or a city manager in a small. Princeton, Illinois is one of those. Rachel Skaggs was recently hired there as city manager, and that's kind of her home area. But she worked in the Chicago suburbs after she got her master's degree in public administration. So. Northern Illinois University is the biggest one. That's they have one of the top programs in masters for city manager positions in the country. Another one is Kansas. KU has a really good program. But there are other smaller. Drake has a program. So there is other programs as well. Sometimes they're a little broader in terms of not-for-profit management or hospital management or things like that. But NIU still has a program really focused on municipalities and city management. and they're very strong. There's a lot of graduates from that program that I see around the country when I'm out at conferences and stuff. They have quite a group of alumni who are working as professional local government managers around the country. I would say there's 3 to 6 maybe that I would suggest that are really pretty top-notch. Some are regional in nature, like focus more in the Midwest. There's one that does a lot in Texas. There's some that do a lot in California. But there's several that do a lot in the Midwest that are pretty active, that keep in touch. I like to see those firms at the conferences, getting, knowing the people, because they're the ones that might know whether so-and-so might be thinking about, might be a good person to talk to about an opportunity. They might not apply unless someone talks to
They're in
them.
the flow.
Yeah, you probably know how that works, Peter. I mean, it could be, that probably happened in superintendent business as well. And that's kind of the way it works. You get that contact and maybe you get an applicant and they'll know that person might be interested. Whereas if you just advertise for it, might not get an interest.